Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Cast On Day. It's our Snuggle Knit Along starting today, which runs for 2 weeks, and sound down. It is featuring the yarns of Richard DeVries. In particular, we're using Sirocco. This is a beautiful DK weight, 100 gram skein, and it is 100% merino yarn. And we've got lots of different color combinations. Most of the knit-alongers have chosen their combos. We were waiting for our second shipment this week, which just arrived late last night. So I put together some more combos from the new shipment, and they are up on the events page under Snuggle Kal or Knit Along. As well, I have them on the table, and I am using for my sample cowl these 3 colors. Can you tell I love blues? Maybe a little bit too much. So feel free to let us know how you're doing, where you're watching from, and if you've already cheated and started casting on. This video will be an introduction to the knit along, and we'll go over all the different techniques we're going to cover in it and all the helpful hints. And then I will post later on today a bird's eye view video, which will give a little bit more in-depth technique. So stay tuned for that later. Hi everybody. So tomorrow is the first day of summer. We're all excited about that. Longest day of the year, which means more knitting time. Hopefully sitting outside on your balcony or your deck, or down by the beach, or in the backyard, or if it gets too hot, maybe sitting inside by a sunny window. And so we wanted to start the knit along as a summer project, something that's easy to transport. I find in the summertime I do better with projects that are on a 60 centimeter circular. It's just a little bit smaller, it sits in my lap. I don't have to constantly push the stitches along the cord to get to the needle tips. So this cowl is perfect for that. By now you should have your pattern printed off of Ravelry. That's the cover page. It has been knit by many cowl enthusiasts around the world. It's called The Snuggle is Real. It's designed by a Canadian maker. His name is Max the Knitter, and he is based in Quebec. So he's come up with a great design because it leaves a lot of creativity in color choices, yarn choices, and also a nice way to learn a few new techniques without having a massive project to work on. And today I'm just going to go over the different techniques that we hope to cover in this knit along. There is something to start called the provisional cast on. You might not have tried it before, or you may have tried a different way that you felt was too complicated. The technique that's in this particular project is super easy, and my only helpful hint is for the provisional cast on, you are required to use waste yarn. Waste yarn is just a leftover bit of yarn, but you want to make sure that it's a little bit slippy and silky, not woolly, not fuzzy. I prefer a cotton or a bamboo blend. This particular one I'll bring close to the camera. It is a bamboo blend, so you can see that it is quite silky. You need less than 10 grams for your waste yarn, and it should be in a color that is a good contrast from your main color. So I've chosen the sky blue as my main color, so I want something that I can really see. And the reason being, when we do a provisional cast on, it's acting as a stitch holder. It's a permanent cast on edge, but it does act as a stitch holder. And at the end of our project, we will be undoing the waste yarn very carefully. So if your color is too close to the main color, you know what's going to happen. Anybody want to answer that question? I'm sure it's happened to one of us somewhere in the world. We will accidentally snip into the live stitches of our main color. And once that happens, it's very, very difficult to fix. And you just don't want to have to suffer through that. So please take my advice and use a pale color if you have a dark color for your main color, or use a very, very bright color, little scrap of cotton yarn if you have something that's colorful like this. Use a bright color. So that is tip number 1. So for the provisional cast on, which I've done here, and I will bring up closer to the camera in a minute, you can choose whichever cast on method you like, because it's all going to come out after. So don't worry about, should I do the cable cast on, should I do the knitted cast on, or should I do the long tail? It's really whatever you're most comfortable with. You're basically just casting on the required number of stitches and knitting two rounds with the waste yarn. I do prefer my favorite method, which is the long tail cast on, but it's completely up to you. It's all going to be taken off and disposed of after, and then we'll be left with the live stitches in the main color, which gets folded under like magic and attached to the lining. Okay, so that is enough about the waste yarn. I bet some of you have already started. Hi Sharon, hi Hetty, hi Andrea. Andrea picked out some beautiful colors for her snuggle combo. So we'll talk about the yarn. The original pattern does call for 2 colors, main color and contrast one, in a DK merino wool, and Max the Knitter has paired that with a fingering weight kid mohair and silk yarn. That is for the lining of the cowl. So the 2 colors on my left, your right, would be on the outside of the cowl, and the fuzzy yarn would be the inside lining and also the drawstring. So that's where you have options. If you're not the sort of person who can wear the halo, the fuzzy yarn, up against your neck, then please don't use it as the lining. It is lovely and soft to knit with, but because it is an animal fiber, it comes from baby goats mixed with silk. It does have a little bit of a prickly fiber, and it also can create extra heat. So if you are okay wearing it, then we have very pale colors: sky blue, cream, misty lilac, and dusty pink. And that will only be for the inside lining. You won't see it other than the drawstring. So I think most of us have erred on the side of caution and have gone with main color, contrast color 1, and contrast color 2, all in the merino DK. I mean, if you're giving it as a gift and you're not sure of the person's sensitivity to wool fibers, then by all means play it safe and go with all 3 in the same type of wool. And that's what I'm doing here. So I've chosen my lightest color as my main color, and that is going to be on the bottom ribbing and the top ribbing and worked into the color work section. And then I've chosen my darkest color as contrast 1, which is only used in the color work section on the outside of the cowl. So when you're choosing which should be your main color and your contrast 1, try to pick the two colors in your combo set that have the most contrast. You don't want them to be too similar, such as, let's see, well, I'm sure none of you have chosen these two. Those two are just too similar. You would not see any of the effects of the color work in the mosaic knitting. Something like this would work well together. They're in the same family, the blue tones, but there's quite a bit of contrast. And something like those two. So today you're just concentrating on your waist yarn, picking something that is a suitable contrast color and a silky or cotton texture. And then you're going to concentrate on which should be your main color and which should be contrast one. That's all you're going to be working with for at least a week, unless you're a speedy knitter. And then the third color will be just the fun pop of color. You know it's in there, but nobody really sees it unless you turn your cowl inside out. And it's also going to be worked in the drawstring. So that is my pop color. I could have easily worked with these two as main color and contrast one, but I don't know. I'm just a blue girl, so I always go with the blues and the greens, calm colors. Okay, so I will show you a close-up at the camera of the provisional cast on, which sounds so much harder than it really is. I hope it hasn't scared anyone off from participating in our knit along, because I know it's going to be a lot of fun. So I've cast on with my long tail cast on, and I've knit 2 rounds according to the pattern. And then I have to start with 1 round of knitting in my main color, which is the light blue. And the reason why we start with 1 round of knitting instead of directly going into the ribbing is because it's easier to graft together knit stitches at the very end than it is a mixture of knitting and purling. So this is a very well planned out pattern. And then I was to knit in ribbing, knit 2, purl 2, for 2.5 inches. Now that 2.5 inch section is not going to be showing on your neck. It's folded under like magic, and you're only going to see half of it. The other half becomes the border for the inside lining. Now I've jumped ahead just so you can get an idea of what the mosaic knitting looks like. It's very, very fun. It's addictive. You get into a nice, easy rhythm. And it is an 8-row repeat, but I promise you within maybe the first 8 rows or the first 16 rounds, you'll have it memorized and you won't have to look at the written directions anymore. So there I have my main color for the ribbing and also worked in the mosaic with contrast number 1. Okay, so we will be exploring provisional cast on, which I've mentioned, mosaic knitting. For anyone who doesn't know what mosaic knitting is, it's become one of the most popular knitting techniques, maybe over the last 2 or 3 years. Once designers figured out that they could use mosaic knitting to create something that looks like Fair Isle knitting, but without tangling the yarns and without knitting 2 colors per row or per round, they were all for it. So that is the magic of mosaic knitting. If you can knit in stripes, if you've done 2-row stripes on another project, you're more than experienced enough to try mosaic knitting. It is basically a combination of 2 rows of one color and 2 rows of the contrast color. But the magic happens when you throw in some slip stitches and some knits in between and some pearls. And that makes a beautiful little nubby pattern, which feels really nice. The texture in Richard's yarn is gorgeous, and it creates a very playful interruption in your stripe pattern. So I think you're really going to get hooked on mosaic knitting, and once you start working in rounds, it just becomes like a nice meditative rhythm. That's what I find anyway. So once we cover the mosaic knitting, which I think I'll do as a bird's eye video later today, so you can see me actually doing the mosaic knitting for when you get to that step. And then that video will be on the events page, and you can refer to it anytime whenever you get to that stage. We want the knit along to be very relaxed, stress-free, but I know there are some very speedy knitters, so I don't want to hold anyone up if you get to the mosaic knitting before next Friday. Okay, so mosaic knitting, and then across the top of the cowl, we're going to try a new technique for making buttonholes. The buttonholes are worked into the ribbing so that we can thread the drawstring I-cord through at the very end. So please, if you are very speedy, don't go past the buttonhole section. This week's goal would be try to get your bottom ribbing done, practice the mosaic knitting. If you finish to the top of the mosaic knitting before next Friday, that's great. Maybe just put it aside and wait for the buttonhole technique, and then you might find it's a nicer way to do buttonholes than you've done before. We're also going to work on our grafting technique. The grafting technique comes in towards the very end when we join the lining back with the beginning of our ribbing here. And then we say goodbye to our waste yarn. It all happens step by step, which is great. And our final technique will be the I-cord, which is the drawstring. So the I-cord will be done in your contrast 2. For me, that's the pop color. So you'll see a little bit of this color on the outside of the cowl. So those are all our techniques. Oh yes, there is a snuggle draw at the very end of the knit along, and I have a record of everybody who purchased a combo and signed up, but I think we'd all love to see some progress pics as we go along, and feel free to post those on the events page anytime you like, and we'll give lots of feedback about your color combos. If you're having trouble deciding which should be your main, your contrast 1, and your contrast 2, then there's a whole group of us here that are just ready, willing, and able to help you make that decision. That's basically what we do when we have our in-store knit-alongs. We're all sitting around our big maker's table, and if somebody's having a hard time deciding on which color to choose for the main or the contrast, we just ask for everybody's input. It's really nice to feel like you're part of that community. Yeah, so I think that's everything I wanted to cover. I was talking a little bit fast because I had a Kit Kat before I started. Anybody, if you have any questions or you're not sure if your knitting skill or level is up to participating in the Snuggle Kal, please just leave a comment below the video or post something in our events page, Snuggle Kal, and I can always, I don't know, make you feel more confident to try it. If you've worked with circular needles before in the round, then I would say that's all you need to be comfortable with. You're not going to be using more than one color at a time per row, so it's It's quite easy to do. And there is lots of time to sign up. For those of you who are just finding out about the cowl today, please don't feel that we're leaving you behind in the dust. There's lots of time. You can jump in and start whenever you like. I have posted, I think, 8 new color combos today on the events page. They're all numbered. If you see one that you like, please message, call, or email, and I will let you know if it's still available, and I can mail it out to you or get it ready for curbside pickup. So hope you're all enjoying your first cast on day, and enjoy your weekend, and look for the technique video later tonight when it uploads, and that will show you the mosaic knitting. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Happy Snuggle Kal!